In my restless dreams, I see that game. Silent Hill 2. The 2001 video game that sees protagonist James Sunderland enter the Lovecraftian town of Silent Hill is my favorite game of all time, and possibly one of my favorite works of art. Now, I say art because Silent Hill 2 stands out as one of the best stories in the horror genre. Yes, including movies. Even today, almost 20 years since its release, people are discussing its cryptic story. Silent Hill 2 tells its narrative in a way that is entirely unique for its position as an interactive cinematic experience. Yeah, I made that up. What puts the game on such a high pedestal for me is the way it keeps calling me back to it. Silent Hill 2 compels as much as it repels. It lures you in, but it keeps its mysteries hidden, forcing you to explore every aspect of its ethereal narrative. Now, there are tons of fantastic YouTube videos that analyze this game. Super Eye Patch Wolf and Max the Rat in particular have fascinating breakdowns that both explore Silent Hill 2 as a game and its philosophical themes. I'm going to be coming at it from a different angle as a filmmaker. This will be the first video in a 3-part series. Part 1 will discuss story and character, Part 2 will discuss cinematography and music, and the third will be a video solely on the game's endings, and what I argue is the indisputable true ending of Silent Hill 2. We're putting it to rest! So before we get into things, please take the time to hit the bell icon below to subscribe to my channel and be notified when I release the next videos in this series. Also, since we're taking a deep look at the game, I'm gonna assume that you played it, and there will be spoilers. If you haven't played it, then seriously, go do that right now, because there's like a whole bunch of videos on YouTube that talk about this. So without further ado, I give you part 1, The Brilliance of Silent Hill 2's storytelling.
A sequel to Konami's Silent Hill, Silent Hill 2 is more of a reimagining of the franchise than a proper sequel. The story follows widower James Sunderland as he journeys through the town of Silent Hill because of a mysterious letter he received from his deceased wife Mary, calling him back to the seemingly abandoned resort town. Along the way, he meets several lost souls and is forced to both relive his most tragic memories and face what seems to be the darkest images of his soul. I've racked my brain for years trying to dissect and find out what it is that makes Silent Hill 2's story so unique. And the truth is that it isn't. In fact, the concept of a widower going into the underworld dates back to the time of ancient Greece in the mythological story of Orpheus. Orpheus was a poet married to Eurydice who died tragically from a snake bite. Devastated, Orpheus travels to the underworld to win her back. Hades, god of the underworld, tells him that if he can walk to the upper world without looking back at Eurydice, then she can return with him. Spoiler alert, he fails. He laments a bit after until, depending on the story ending, yeah, they were doing those back in the ancient times too, he either is torn apart by Maenads or commits suicide. Either way, he's sent to the underworld where he and Eurydice remain forever. The similarities are striking. Both Orpheus and James are grieving lovers who descend into the underworld to find and possibly retrieve their deceased wives. Both fail at their attempt to retrieve them, and both have tragic ends, at least in 2 out of the 3 canon endings for Silent Hill 2. I don't think these similarities are coincidental, and I think that Silent Hill 2's use of this mythic narrative is part of why it's so compelling. Myths are stories that have reoccurred throughout history, oftentimes interwoven with religious motifs. Therefore, myths deal with the most essential aspects of human nature. The mythic structure is where the term monomyth is derived. American professor Joseph Campbell coined the term the hero's journey as a common template of a broad category of tales and lore that involves a hero who goes on an adventure and, in a decisive crisis, wins a victory and then comes home changed or transformed. It is the basis for most modern movies, such as Star Wars and Harry Potter. In fact, you can argue it's a prerequisite for good storytelling. And so it's no doubt that Silent Hill 2's story stands out because it implements mythic structure. Now let's go a step further. Psychoanalyst Carl Jung saw these stories as a template for the process of human development he called individuation. Jung saw individuation as the process where the individual self develops out of an undifferentiated consciousness, which innate elements of personality, the components of the immature psyche, and the experiences of the person's life become, if the process is more or less successful, integrated over time into a well-functioning whole. This process was necessary in order to become a mentally healthy individual. Jung believed that one could achieve this process by exploring the unconscious part of the mind. I know, we're going deep, but stay with me. Jung saw the recurring motifs in all myths, despite culture or historical background, as representations of the unconscious aspect of the human psyche. a collective subconscious. Therefore, stories and myths, especially the ones that compel us most, are in fact explorations of the unconscious mind. Jung says he simply didn't know that the psyche contains all the images that have ever given rise to myths, and that our unconscious mind is an acting and suffering subject with an inner drama which primitive man rediscovers by means of analogy in the process of nature, both great and small. This is the brilliance of Silent Hill 2. By using a mythic structure, the game implements the most ancient and human of literary devices, the archetype. And the use of archetypes allows us to psychoanalyze its story much like a dream. Each character, monster, and environment tells us more about our protagonist, James Sunderland, than any flashback or exposition can. The creators of Silent Hill 2 show, they don't tell, which is the basis for any great work of art. Now I want to take a second here and take a look at the genre of horror. Horror stories are first and foremost meant to terrify their audience, whether it be viscerally, emotionally, or psychologically. There are so many different approaches that horror can take, but most horror starts by establishing a dark and macabre tone. Horror stories in essence replicate the feelings of nightmares. From Hereditary to The Shining, most horror stories begin with a very nightmarish quality. In fact, Silent Hill 3 and 4 literally begin with nightmares, and Silent Hill 2 is no different in how it establishes a dark tone. So with James Sunderland looking in a mirror, in a dark and dilapidated bathroom. His image is sullen, and the overall feeling is dark and depressive. However, the game quickly pulls that back and introduces us to Silent Hill, not as a nightmare, but as a dream. The town is shrouded in fog, and there is a rustic beauty to the view. The music is not one of foreboding, but of fantasy and escape. There's no better way to represent James's psychological repression of the fact that his wife is dead, and at his hands no less, than by whitewashing it with nostalgia. Silent Hill 2 takes a huge note from filmmaker David Lynch in that it presents a surreal world that is oftentimes difficult to navigate and comprehend, much like one's own unconscious. While Lynch's work is often a nightmare that presents itself and then recedes into its dreamlike facade, Silent Hill 2 is more like a nightmare that is slowly revealed by an eroding dream. By presenting Silent Hill 2 as a dream, and using a mythic story structure, Silent Hill 2 begs to be psychoanalyzed and deciphered. And like any good dream, every person in it is a representation of the dreamer. Silent Hill 2's characters are interwoven in such an elaborate web that it's impossible to understand one without the context of the other. And while character interactions are far and few between, James's isolation makes the viewer/player all the more attentive and appreciative when they do appear, perhaps reflecting James's desire for connection. The story's three central characters seem to be on a road of trials through Silent Hill. They are Angela, James, and Eddie. The story implements the rule of three here, which is a rule in writing that states a trio of events or characters is more humorous, satisfying, or effective than other numbers. There are three main characters who visit Silent Hill. Most puzzles have three elements to them, such as the coin and tablet puzzles, and the game itself, when first released, had three canon endings. There are other threes in the game, and we'll discuss those later. If we take a look at Angela, James, and Eddie, we see three characters that all have the same root psychological trauma, which is both being victims and perpetrators of their own crimes. Angela was raped and abused as a child and kills her father and brother out of self-defense. James was verbally abused by Mary, and he killed her out of both a desire to give her peace, but also anger at her for taking his life away. Eddie was made fun of and abused at school and lashes out, shooting his bullies in a murderous rage. In fact, the three of these represent a type of gradient in regards to the actions that they take. Angela turns her anger inward with depression and a desire for suicide. Eddie is the exact opposite, constantly blaming everyone but himself for his suffering. He turns into the quintessential mass shooter, murdering those around him. And James is in the middle, both murdering Mary out of anger, but also having suicidal guilt and depression for his actions. So Silent Hill 2 sets up the perfect character web for exploring the themes of suffering, tragedy, guilt, and punishment. In fact, it's very similar to Jean-Paul Sartre's No Exit, with three characters each trapped together, acting as each other's oppressors. Similarly, all the characters fail each other in a way that is specific to their trauma. James fails to save Angela, much like he couldn't save Mary. When he does try, he's berated by her. And Angela ironically acts as a seducer, possibly in the form of sexual desire for James, but more in the sense of self-destruction and suicide. Eddie, on the other hand, is betrayed by James, who ends up in Eddie's eyes as another bully, For James, Eddie is another victim of his anger, and so Silent Hill seems to be punishing each character through their own devices. Hell is other people, as some would say. Now, I put Maria and Laura in separate categories as the other three characters because unlike James, Eddie, and Angela, they're not on trial. In a mythological sense, they're both supernatural aides and threshold guardians. Supernatural aides are characters on the hero's journey that act as guides for the hero, either imparting wisdom or items of strength. Threshold guardians are obstacles and opponents that prevent the hero from advancing on their path, as well as testing the hero's personal progress. In the case of Laura, she makes things more difficult for James almost every time he interacts with her, forcing him to find a workaround or confront his demons and his true self. In fact, Laura is the one that exposes James as an unreliable narrator to us.
We met at the hospital. It was last year.
You liar! Laura,
Fine, don't believe me.
but last year, Mary was already... I'm sorry, Laura. Anyway, let's go.
Maria too gives James direction by pointing him to the Lakeview Hotel, as well as forcing him to follow Laura in the hospital. But she also acts as a deceiver, tempting and berating James, and ultimately being the final threshold guardian of the story. Maria is important because she represents a specific Jungian archetype known as the anima. I'm not going to get into this too much as Max Durant did a great video exploring it, so I'll put a link to that below. However, in quick summary, the anima is the female part of a man's psyche. She's what he wants from a woman, and can oftentimes become an obstacle towards individuation. If the anima is too weak, she makes for a man that is emotionally stunted, leading to a lack of compassion and violence. If she is too strong a figure, she will make the man weak, depressive, and oftentimes suicidal, both of which are aspects of James's mental state. The similarities between Laura and Maria don't just end at their roles in James's psychological journey, they also share the fact that they do not have last names. This, in my opinion, points to the fact that both Maria and Laura are manifestations of Silent Hill. An important fact to remember when we take a look at the game's true ending. Monsters in the game act as threshold guardians, obstacles preventing James from advancing, but they too act as psychological archetypes in the same way as Maria and Laura. Carl Jung writes, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." In Silent Hill 2, this is the infamous Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head contrasts with both James and the other monsters in the game. We can see all the monsters James fights as shadows of the anima, as they are all feminine. Pyramid Head, on the other hand, is super masculine. He represents a type of ultra-violent, powerful sexual male force that James clearly is not. For Jung, the archetype of the shadow must be confronted for individuation to occur. While an unsophisticated horror story would make Pyramid Head out to be a villain or a basic monster, Silent Hill 2 uses him as an unlikely supernatural aid. Pyramid Head pushes James deeper and deeper into his process of individuation. And when James finally confronts Pyramid Head, he does not have to defeat it. Instead, Pyramid Head kills itself, both foreshadowing James's suicide, but also illustrating an integration of the shadow into James. Pyramid Head kills Maria 3 times, twice on screen, and I'll argue the third off. Again, rolls of 3. However, we can also read it that Maria is killed 2 times by Pyramid Head, and the third by James, after he has integrated Pyramid Head into his being and accepted that he is Pyramid Head. On a pessimistic reading, Pyramid Head is torturing James, reminding him of his murder of Mary. It isn't until he accepts Pyramid Head as part of himself and take responsibility for what he's done that he can then reenact the murder himself. On an optimistic reading, Pyramid Head is showing James the danger of Maria. Maria is an illusion who is leading James astray, and Pyramid Head is the harsh reality of both who James is and what he has done. Therefore, once Pyramid Head is integrated and accepted, James reenacts his murder of Mary, but this time, killing Maria, the illusion of the woman James thinks he wants. The illusion that Mary is alive, the illusion that James is a good man and that he is entirely a victim of tragedy. With this, James is able to take responsibility for his actions and move on with his life. It is this personal complexity and multiplicity of meaning that makes Silent Hill 2's story so incredibly compelling. With every level we descend, we only find more to be discovered. Silent Hill 2 appeals to our collective unconscious, the part of us that's human. Its story uses mythic structure and motifs that allow for us to not only read it in literary terms, but also from a psychoanalytical perspective. Thus, what could be a story about a man in a spooky town with monsters is instead a myth of incredible personal depth and a perfect execution of psychological horror. Well, here's where this video ends. I could keep going on for hours on Silent Hill 2's story, but it's time to get into the game's use of visuals and cinematography. And just like its story, there's tons to be discovered. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe down below for my next videos. Also, what do you think about my interpretation of Pyramid Head? Is he friend or foe? Leave a comment and we'll discuss. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.